In an emergency, one of the first voices you'll likely hear is that of a 911 dispatcher. Joining me today in the roll call room is Alysn Everbeck, the Executive Director for Skagit 911. She's here to talk about the critical role dispatchers play every day, as well as some new technology for Skagit County residents. Alysn, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So let's say that I'm at home and an emergency happens, or I'm out in the community and I see something and I've got to call 911. What can I expect when somebody answers the phone?
Good question. So the first thing our public safety telecommunicators, or dispatchers as they're commonly known, will ask is the location of the incident that's occurring. That's the most critical piece of information. We do have a fair amount of technology that can help us narrow down a location when a caller's unsure of where they're at or where they are headed if they're moving. But the most critical question is nailing down a location so we know where to send responders. After that, the next most critical question is what is happening, so we know which kind of responders need to go, whether that's a law enforcement officer, a sheriff's deputy, or if it's a fire or EMS personnel. And sometimes it's both. Say someone's calling in a motor vehicle collision, we might be sending all the resources we have access to. So location first, what's happening, and then we want to narrow down, is what's happening emergent? And that often depends on the time delay of what the incident was and when it occurred versus when the person's calling it in. For instance, if they're reporting a burglary that's happening now, that's an emergent call. If they're reporting a burglary from 2 weeks ago, less of an emergency. So those are our core questions to begin.
You mentioned there's a little bit of technology. So if I'm driving around and I'm like, I got no idea where I am, what kind of technology do you guys have to help narrow that down?
Our telecommunicators have access to lat-long information, assuming the person is calling from a cell phone and that it's a relatively new cell phone and has service. So there's some caveats there. If they have a very old cell phone that doesn't have the ability to transmit that information, we aren't going to get it. Also, if they have a cell phone that isn't connected to service or a bill that hasn't been paid, they can still access 911. There are a lot of agencies in the community that hand out free cell phones to people so they can call in an emergency, but those phones without service don't transmit the location information. So it depends on what kind of equipment they're dealing with, the information that we would receive.
Is it possible to text into 911 if I only have that?
Yes. In the state of Washington, it is now possible to text 911 from every single county. That was an initiative that we pushed for a couple of years ago in the 911 community, and we are now successful that every county can receive text messages to 911. And we tell callers if that's the only way they have to access us, or if it's the most safe way for them to get in touch with us in that moment, then please do. We generally say call if you can and text if you can't.
Okay. So that's the call, when I'm calling in an emergency. What happens then after we hang up and that call is over? What comes next for a dispatcher?
For our dispatchers and call takers, it depends a little bit on what's been reported and who answered the phone. So for our staff here at Skagit 911, we train everyone to be cross-trained in the sense that they're not done training until they've been trained on the phones and on the radio. So the person who answers the line might also be working a radio. If for that day they're just call taking, then they would enter the call into our computer-aided dispatcher CAD system, and it would have all of the important information that the dispatcher needs to send the right resources. That call would pop up on the appropriate dispatcher's screen based on the location of the incident and the type of incident it is. And then the dispatcher would take over sending those available resources and giving them updates to the call as the caller provides more information if it's something that's evolving. They would also respond to the requests from the field units when they arrive, if they need more resources, if they have questions about history at the location or with the people, if they need to run someone for warrants, that sort of thing. That would be the dispatcher's responsibility.
Okay. So you mentioned as more information comes in, it sounds like there might be times where, like you mentioned the burglary, if it's in progress, sounds like the dispatcher may try to keep that caller on the line until resources show up versus the burglary 2 weeks ago, where you get that initial information like, all right, thanks, and then an officer will be out there as soon as they can, type thing.
Yes, that's very typical. If there's an in-progress and evolving emergency, we try to keep the caller on the line as long as it's safe for them to do so and they have sufficient battery on their phone. An example of when that wouldn't happen is potentially a search and rescue incident. If someone has very little battery, we may encourage them to stay off the phone so we can get back in touch with them if we need to, if we think it will be a long time before they get rescued. But if it's something like an in-progress burglary, we want to keep them on the line until we can get resources there to hear if anything changes and to provide them updates as much as we can.
Okay. You mentioned a call taker and then somebody else is working the radio. So if I'm working there, I may be only responsible for answering calls or only responsible for dispatching units. How does that work, your division of duties on the floor?
That's a good question, and the answer is a little complicated. We're a highly interdependent team. So the cleanest, easiest answer is when you're early in your training, you may only be call taking because that's all you've been certified to do at this time. Once you've been certified to radio dispatch, you could be assigned to call taking, but you might take over a radio for someone who has an in-progress emergency with another agency or just needs a break for the moment. Or if you're working the radio, you might also be picking up overflow lines. So there is quite a lot of overlap in the work that's being done, but we do try to have a distinction between the roles as much as possible so the call takers can focus on the callers and the dispatchers can focus on the field responders.
Are the dispatchers themselves, can they ever get in and listen to that call that's in progress?
Yeah, they can.
Okay. You've got the technology to be able to do that. I would imagine there's times.
There are times. We don't necessarily encourage people to listen to one another's work. We don't want anybody evaluating their peers in that way, but we absolutely use it for training, and if it's relevant for an in-progress emergency, it can be a very helpful tool.
Okay. You mentioned the training and kind of starting at one level and then moving on. When you hire a new dispatcher, new staff, what does that training process look like before they're on their own out there doing the thing?
It's a long process. It's a very complex job, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of technology they need to learn, many different systems they have to be proficient at before we trust them with taking 911 calls and dispatching, being responsible for people's lives. So our training starts with 6 to 8 weeks in the academy, which is a classroom type setting where they learn all the information they need to have readily available to them. They learn how to use the systems. They learn about a lot of geography and codes and all of our different agencies. And they take several tests. They get certified to process medical calls based on our protocols. And once they're successful in passing all of those tests, then they move to the floor training. And there they stay for, again, about 6 to 8, maybe 12 weeks, working with a communications training officer, a CTO, one-on-one to process calls. And we start very early. They get signed off to process our non-emergency calls that have come through our ANET system, our non-emergency triage system. They can do that work independently when their trainer is otherwise engaged once they've been signed off on ANET. Then we get them non-emergent calls signed off, so calls can be triaged for them by another public safety telecommunicator who has determined it's a non-emergent call. Then they get fully call take signed off, and that typically happens within 3 months. We generally have our trainees sit at call taking for a couple of months to really solidify those skills and build up their confidence, give them a little bit of a break from the highly feedback intensive environment of daily training. And then we move them into a radio academy, which takes about a week. It's a more truncated process. And then they start again with a communications training officer on the radio, and that takes a similar amount of time as call taking. So all told, depending on whether they move through fire training or law dispatcher training, it's anywhere from 6 to 12 months to be fully trained.
It's a long time.
It's a long time. It's a big investment.
But it's such an important job that you need to make sure you do it right.
Yes.
And multitasking is a skill that you guys, I'm sure, want. And we've got a picture up on the screen here. It's a dispatch console. It's got just a couple of screens on there.
A few, yeah.
Talk to us about what all we're seeing there.
This is a typical setup for a public safety telecommunicator. Believe it or not, the supervisors have 2 more screens. So the dispatchers typically have these 8. In the top left, you can see that's our radio consoles where they can select which channels they're listening to or frequencies. Then in the middle 4, those are all CAD, our computer-aided dispatch system, showing various things, the pending calls, the units that have been assigned, their research into the record system. All of that is available on these 4 screens. On the right side are 2 screens for our phone system. One is the mapping and one is where they would answer and receive and interact with calls. And then on the bottom left is our what we call our common office environment. It's just the typical email and Microsoft tools and access to the internet.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, and they're using all of it all day long.
That's I can see how the training needs to be so long to be able to get proficient in all those things. Talk a little bit about your history. I'm sure at one point you were a dispatcher and doing all that stuff.
I was.
Walk us through your, role, your journey in dispatch to where you are now.
I started dispatch in 2009 as a public safety telecommunicator trainee in Bellingham is where I started. And there was a little bit less technology then when I started, but it was still very complicated. And the training timeline was very similar. Started out as a call taker and then moved on to a dispatcher. The agency I worked for only did law dispatch, so that's where my experience was. I was a dispatcher for 6 or 7 years and then promoted to supervisor and then became the training supervisor, which at that point in my life was my ultimate goal. I was really excited about training. I loved delivering training and wanted to do curriculum development, thought that was very exciting and something that our agency needed. So I moved into the training office in 2019. I was there for 3 years. I did 2 full revisions of our training program, which was a lot of work, but very gratifying. Had a great time training new public safety telecommunicators. And then in 2021, the position opened up to move into Deputy Director of the agency. And I hadn't really envisioned myself as a leader of the agency early on in my career. I really just saw myself as solving the next problem in front of me. And at that time, I recognized that there were some things I thought our agency needed and that I could provide. So I put my hat in the ring and they selected me. I was in that role for 3 years, and then the next problem that presented itself was the executive director position at Skagit 911. So I, again, put my hat in the ring and was selected and moved down here in December of 2024.
Nice. You mentioned that you started your career and it was police only.
Yes.
Remember when I started as well, each agency had their own dispatchers that were, for us, employed by Mount Vernon PD. They were sitting in our office.
Yeah.
I remember being a young officer and, young and single, and I don't have anything to do on a Friday night. I'm going to come and sit with our dispatchers, which is really fun to watch how they worked and everything they did. But shortly after that, they consolidated. And so now all the dispatchers for all the different agencies, police and fire, sit in the same building. What are some of the advantages of consolidating like that versus each agency having their own?
The biggest advantage in my mind is just the speed of communication. The work that we do is critical emergency communications, and it's so much faster when everyone involved is in the same room. We also cut down on errors because we're not relaying information to another agency, calling and providing that information. They're sharing the system. They have access to the same information. They can hear each other across the room. So when there's a big incident involving multiple agencies or multiple disciplines, law and fire and EMS, they are all working from the same playbook. The other side of that is they're all trained in the same way, so they're using the same protocols and the same language, and we don't have as many inadvertent miscommunications because the culture is different in different departments.
So when we all employed our own, it was obviously the city of Mount Vernon paying their employees. You have a lot more. What's the funding source for dispatch?
We have a few different funding sources. I'm sure most people are aware their cell phone bill includes a 911 excise tax. That is a pretty small portion of our overall budget. It's about 20% we get from the excise tax. We also have a very small amount that is related to the excise tax, but filters to us through the state 911 office. Each county has a contract that they get a certain amount of funding from that. Then we have, every county has the opportunity to have up to 0.2% of sales tax, and Skagit County has 0.1% of sales tax that funds 911. So that funds about 40% of our overall budget. The remainder is made up in user fees from our agencies that we serve.
It's a complicated matrix of funding.
Budgeting is a fun time of year.
It is. Speaking of budget and personnel, a lot of policing agencies are really struggling with staffing. Filling our ranks. I know since I've been here in 29 years, I think we've been fully staffed twice. And so a lot of agencies are struggling finding people. What's that like in dispatch?
It's not better. Unfortunately, I would love to say that it is. My entire career, we have struggled with staffing dispatch, and it's been pretty endemic across dispatch centers or PSAPs, the public safety answering points, throughout the state and throughout the nation. Very few of us are fully staffed or remain so for long. In my career, I think there was one period of a couple of days where we were fully staffed. So it's not better. It's gotten worse post-COVID. It's harder to find people who meet our qualifications, and it's harder to find people who are interested in the type of work. The work is challenging, the hours are long, it's high stakes, and you have to have the right kind of orientation to want to do this work and to stay in it long. And as you mentioned before, it takes a long time to train someone. So we can have someone leave in 2 weeks, but we won't replace them for at least a year, more when you consider the amount of pre-hire backgrounding that we have to do.
Sounds very similar to us with police agencies.
Yes.
From the time of hire till the time they're actually operational and making a difference out there in staffing, it's about a year.
Yeah.
You mentioned tough for people to meet their qualifications. What are the qualifications for somebody that wants to come and work in your agency?
We don't have a lot of very strict qualifications in the sense of automatic disqualifiers. You do have to be able to pass a drug test, and if you have any drug use history, it has to be pretty distant and not hardcore drugs, very similar to law enforcement agencies. You also have to pass a fingerprinting and background. If there's been any arrest history, then we have to evaluate whether they could qualify for a variance to access criminal justice information. So that is where we lose a lot of people. We also give a polygraph examination to our applicants. A fair amount of people don't tell the truth. Unfortunately, we tell all of our applicants, just tell the truth. Everybody's done something, everybody's got something in their past, but a lot of people try to hide things, and that's a problem we can't overcome. We also do a pretty thorough background. We look at reference checks, of course, and if people have very quick turnaround with various jobs, if they've left without notice, if they have negative interactions with coworkers or supervisors, that is pretty difficult to overcome in an applicant. But for the most part, we're really just looking for people who have very strong integrity, strong critical thinking skills, and who can manage the stress of the work that we do and the intense environment that we do it in.
What are minimum age and that kind of requirements for you?
They just have to be over 18. I have seen a few people hired at 18 or 19, and sometimes that's successful. So we leave the door open to that possibility. Most people, we want them to be mature enough that they can make the decisions necessary when someone's life is in their hands. So often we want a few more years under their belt before they're ready to do the work, but they could be hired as early as 18.
And you currently have positions open you're hiring for now?
We don't have it open right now. We had a open continuous process, and we found we were getting a lot of applications that were not serious. We were spending a lot of staff time and a lot of money chasing down applications that weren't real. So we've pivoted to doing quarterly applications, and our next application period will be opening within a few weeks. So if you're interested, keep a lookout. It'll be open soon.
And we'll probably, in our description of this, we'll put in a link there so people can, see all the benefits and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Generally, what are some of the benefits people can expect coming to a county agency?
We have pretty good benefits. Certainly, they have access to medical for themselves and their family with a relatively low out-of-pocket pay. We have medical, dental, and vision, of course. They also have access to the state pension. Public safety telecommunicators are eligible for PSERS, the Public Safety Employees Retirement Group. So it's better retirement than PERS, the Standard Public Employment Retirement. They can retire at 55 or with 20 years of service without penalty. So that's an improvement that we recently achieved as an industry. Pay is pretty competitive, and there's a lot of room to grow within the agency. You can become a lead, a trainer. There's pay associated with both of those. You can promote into a supervisory role, or you can join our admin team and sit in my seat one day if you so desire.
Nice. What kind of shifts do your staff work?
Our fully trained staff work 12-hour days. So they're on squads. They start at 6 a.m. typically and go to 1800 or 6 p.m. And then the night shift is 1800 or 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. We do have a few power shifts for the busier hours in the middle of the day. They could work from 10 to 22 or 10 p.m. or they could start at 14 and go to 02 in the morning.
Okay. But 12 hours is your standard shift.
Yes.
How many days a week is that?
They work what we call a Pittman schedule. So they have 3 days on, 4 days off, and then the next week they're 4 days on, 3 days off. Okay. So their swing day is Saturday, which means every squad gets Saturday and Sunday off every other week.
Okay. That's kind of nice for folks. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that it is a very stressful environment, and I think sometimes dispatchers can get forgotten about when it comes to the first responder world. Your folks are dealing with, like you said, those emergencies, life's in their hands right now. How does that stress impact your folks that are taking those calls?
Sure. It impacts everybody differently. You know, one of the things that we have to acknowledge with the impact of critical incident exposure is that it's different for every person. It depends on the life they've lived and the experiences they've had, what they bring to the work. So we can't expect that the same incident will impact the different team members in the same way. We absolutely train people about stress management and recognizing and being aware of their triggers or their biases or areas that might be blind spots for them early on in their career. We talk about stress management as early as in their application process to see how aware they are of those risks and how prepared they are for dealing with that in their life, what kind of support system they have available to them. We talk about coping mechanisms and stress management techniques throughout people's career. Our agency offers a robust EAP, an employee assistance program, that is specifically geared towards first responders, so they have culturally competent resources to reach out to. Previously in my career, when I worked for a municipality and we had access to an EAP, sometimes you would call and the person would say, "Oh my gosh, that thing that you went through or experienced, that's terrible. You shouldn't do that work anymore." Well, that's not helpful for anyone. We want to stay in the work that we love. We want to continue to serve our community. We just need the resources to be able to do it in a way that's healthy for us. So it's really important that we talk to someone who is aware of all of the possibilities of what we could be reporting and processing throughout our careers. We also have strong counseling benefits through our health insurance. We have a peer support team within the dispatch center. There's also a statewide peer support network. If you wanted to reach out to someone that's not at your agency, that's fine too, and we would support that. We also have a mentoring program for new staff. They get paired up with a tenured dispatcher who can kind of help them, shepherd them through the training process, because it's stressful, it's long, there's a lot of feedback. Sometimes the feedback is critical. It can be hard on your ego, it can be tiring. So we want them to have that resource they can fall back on. Maybe it's not the call per se that's bothering them, but just the totality of what they're going through. We want to help them through that as much as we can.
Yeah, I think people probably don't understand. I've experienced it in my career a little bit, seeing what staff have to deal with. Approximately 10 years ago, we had an officer get shot in the line of duty, and then the suspect himself called dispatch directly, and as he's on the phone with the dispatcher, he's actually shooting his gun still. And so being on the phone with that person, knowing that he just shot an officer, that's tough on somebody.
Those are very tough calls, and there are calls that you will take that you'll remember forever, things that will stick with you, things that challenge your values and your professionalism. I can think of a call that I took as a call taker. The caller was intoxicated and they were threatening suicide, and it was an evening shift, it was bad weather, there were a lot of other calls on the board, so we didn't have any resources available to go at that time. And our protocol was, if someone is actively threatening suicide, we're going to stay on the line until we can get them help. And I knew it was going to be a while for this caller, and we were going through the small talk that you do to try to keep somebody on the line, try to keep them engaged. And he was telling me all of the reasons why he felt like he should die that day. And it was a lot of things he had done throughout his life that were very bad things he had done specifically to children. And that was a really tough call for me to stay present and to continue to serve him in the way that the agency expected, the community expected, and that I expect of myself, with all the feelings that brings up as a person, as a parent, as a community member. But we have to keep our mission in front of mind as we're going through these things, and know that the service I give to that person in that moment is a reflection of me and my values, not what I think they deserve or what they should do next.
Yeah, tough. Parents,
Yeah.
what should they teach their kids about calling 911?
The first two things that I think are falling by the wayside a little bit in this technology advanced world is your address and your phone number. It's amazing to me how many kids don't know their address or their phone number, also their parents' names. A lot of people are in our systems, or we can find them somehow if they know their parents' full names. They might know mom's name is Alysn, but they don't know the full name. So that's important too. Beyond that, we tell anybody, kids or adults, just listen to the dispatcher. They've been trained for months. We've drilled into them the exact questions they need to ask for the situation that's presented itself. So all you need to do is listen and respond to their questions, and they'll lead you through the process.
Got it. What about if somebody accidentally calls 911? We've probably all done that at some point, especially like in our office, you got to dial 9 to get out. Then if you mess up. So now I've called 911 and I didn't mean to. What should I or shouldn't I do?
Stay on the line is the first thing. If you hang up, then we don't know if you actually needed help and were prevented from calling us, and we have to call you back. So if you recognize that you've inadvertently dialed 911 and didn't mean to, just stay on the line and say, I'm sorry, it was an accidental dial, and then we don't have to call you back.
Good. We talked in the beginning a little bit about some new technology that's available to residents here in Skagit County. Talk a little bit about what we have, and we've got up on the screen here a QR code that folks can opt into. Talk about what we've got available now.
This is a program called Skagit Ready. It's a community alerting platform, and we use it for a lot more than just community alerting, but the relevant thing for this conversation is we want the community to sign up, to follow this QR code and add their contact information. So if there's an event that the community needs to be made aware of, we have an ability to contact them. There are a few different ways we can message people. The ones that are allowed by statute, by federal authority, are only allowed to be used in the most critical incidents. That's the Amber Alerts that you might get on your phone, that sort of thing. Other than that, if there are lower level emergent messages that we want to get out, people have to opt in and volunteer to be contacted for those. And they do that by signing up for Skagit Ready.
Something like a flood or fires, would those be examples?
Absolutely. If we are evacuating an area or recommending an evacuation, that would qualify for the emergent push of messaging to someone's phone. But if they're in the early stages and warning people that they might want to get ready or that this could be coming in the future, those messages only go out if someone has opted into the process.
Got it. So hopefully everybody now seeing this can go in and opt in so they can get those emergency messages and be prepared when they need to be.
Yes, and they can provide a fair amount of information about their family, if someone has a disability, if they have access or mobility issues or medication issues, they can add all of that into their profile. So there's more information available to first responders. The other thing you can do is tie your account to your residence. When we push messages out for those emergencies, it goes to the phones that are within the map area that's designated. But if you're not in that area, but your house is, say you're at work somewhere else, you wouldn't get that message until you return home if the message is still active. If you sign up for the messaging, it goes to everyone who lives there, whether you're home or not. So you still have awareness of it. You can call your neighbor and say, hey, go check on my house if you need to.
Good. Well, Alysn, we sure appreciate you coming in and all that you and your staff do for the community. I know our officers appreciate it, and I know our community appreciates it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here. It's been a great honor.
Thanks. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you hit subscribe and check out our Facebook and Instagram pages so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time right here in the Roll Call Room.